I'm going to start with something simple. The letter L. The fucking L train. You know, it's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring that up is that, you know, two of your really important properties here in New York are Brooklyn Steel and Music Hall of Williamsburg. And as someone who lives on the far Upper West Side of Manhattan, trying to get down to both venues to get here, to get to Rough Trade, the L train is a huge pain in the ass. And obviously, when you opened Music Hall and Brooklyn Steel, I'm assuming you didn't really consider the fact that the MTA would at one point even consider shutting the whole thing down for a year. How has that impacted either ticket sales, fan expectation, you know, even whether people buy in advance or at the door? Has it actually had an effect?
Well, I'll start with 2007, where we definitely were not thinking about the L train, and I would even say that we might have thought that Williamsburg had already peaked. So again, we hadn't thought much about transportation at that point.
Well, that huge hotel next door would have told you that hasn't happened.
True. Jim, what do you think?
We had a lunch with an agent who was moving to California back in, I think, late fall, and we were talking about the L train shutdown. He said, "Are you worried?" And I thought he was talking about Rough Trade, Music Hall, Brooklyn Steel. And I said, you know what? In the last few years with Uber and Lyft and New Yorkers, we just kind of figured out we think people will get to those venues. We're not worried. And completely deadpan said, "I'm worried about Webster Hall. I don't think anyone from Brooklyn's going to make it to Webster Hall." And it was, for me, who've been in New York since the early 90s, kind of a seismic shift that you're on the Upper West Side, but our audience is in Brooklyn.
Right. Because it was interesting, I was thinking about this as really this is a conference about touring, about live music, but I think that in a way, concert performance, like all concert performance, like politics, is local. Because it's about the person who's bought the ticket, going to that room that night. It's really the ultimate personal experience. You're doing it in an audience with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands if you're going to the Garden or if you're going to Barclays. But it's always about what that person takes away from the experience that night. And what you have, and I use the L train partly facetiously, but actually because it's a very physical issue, it's about ease of access. And it sort of brings to mind, like, how do you account for this? And I was thinking, because I remember you mentioned something about Uber and Lyft in another interview, and I thought, I've come to shows here where I've had to get cars back to Manhattan, and I've paid as much as $40 or $50 to get to 103rd and West End. And that is easily more than the face value of the ticket. Is that something that you have to consider maybe now when you're doing pricing tickets, or just figuring out how people are going to get home?
I think specifically the three rooms we were just talking about, and I'm sure Brooklyn Bowl, the ticket price is not a barrier to entry. And you know, we're spoiled in New York City. I think in other markets around the country, the agent's looking for the biggest offer. They kind of don't care. In New York, I think there's extra emphasis from an agent, from a manager, certainly from the act, to play the right room and play the right. So in terms of us, you know, calculating, you know, is someone going to be able to afford to get home? That realistically, that's not something we're figuring out. We're just, again, kind of pampered New Yorkers. We're assuming it all just works out, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Monday night and what else is in town. Like, there are enough people that want to get to Brooklyn Steel for whomever it is.
David, I also think about the fact that civilians, people that aren't in our business here, are maybe, hopefully, going to one concert a year. I know that most of us in this room are deciding which shows to go to next week, or how many they may make it to tonight, depending on what they want to do. But I think that for so many people, it is a big event, one night a year, and thinking about the cost of transportation is not part of the equation.
When you actually, but in the process of expansion, which is what you've been doing not just in New York, but in Philadelphia, in Boston, and in the South, what are the considerations in terms of the general experience? You know, like, I would assume that in certain places in the South, you're concerned more about parking. parking may not be as much of an issue here, or saying, well, actually, I'm from Philadelphia, so parking in Center City was a huge pain in the ass. Yeah. So you've got to look at like, how are people going to get to the venue? Not necessarily ease of experience, but this is something you want to do night after night after night. And even if though it's one person, maybe a year or every 6 months, you've still got to fill that room. And so there are logistics. Like, what are the logistics that you consider maybe almost in order of priority when you start looking at a new property?
Bowery over the last decade has had, dramatic expansion that we quite frankly never planned on. A lot of that expansion was rooted on local partners. So in Maine, we partner up with Alex Crothers out of Vermont and have an incredible woman, he's the best, an incredible woman, Lauren Wayne. In Philadelphia, it's Mark Fischera and Sean Agnew, who's R5. In Birmingham, it's Brian Teasley, who's from Manor Astroman. They were our local, Sherpas, basically, who not only brought us the idea and said, this is a cool idea and this is why there's a void in the market, but we've kind of deferred to them on a lot of the things. You've said, hey, are you worried about parking? Are you worried about the neighborhood? We've relied on them, and it's been very successful with those folks. Bowery didn't set out to say we want to be in the following 10 markets. As much as people think we like to fight, we generally have avoided going into a market just for the sake of going into a market. We've gone where we thought there was a void. People always said, when are you going to DC? When are you going to DC? That's a great promoter. DC's 930 Club's a great club. There was really no reason for us to go down there just to say, hey, we're in DC. So again, I would say local partners are who we've relied on a lot.
Absolutely, and in Philly in particular, our partner Sean insisted that we have bike racks, and we had never put up bike racks at a venue before, and within the first month, we had doubled or tripled the amount of bike racks needed, because in that neighborhood, the fans were coming on bikes.
How would you define a void?
We can use Brooklyn Steel as an example. We had Open Music Hall in 2007. Rough Trade we opened a few years later, and we kind of looked around and we were like, is it weird that in Brooklyn there isn't a GA venue bigger than Music Hall of Williamsburg? Bowl is roughly the same size. You could say Warsaw's a teeny bit bigger, but not doing it day in and day out. So we're like, this is crazy. So,
and actually for Warsaw, you have the same problem of ease of access, because having gone to Warsaw quite a bit, it was a bit of a trek.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Even if you were coming from Brooklyn.
Yes.
Yeah. So we had looked all over Brooklyn, and we took a meeting with our landlord from Music Hall of Williamsburg, and it turned out that their office is what is now Brooklyn Steel, and it was a steel fabrication plant. And during the meeting, jokingly said, hey, if you ever want to get out of it, and deadpan, and then they called a couple days later, said, you're a great tenant at Music Hall, would love to do it. So again, that was us. Frankly, we weren't sure from when we started to when we opened was 4 years. In that time, Uber happened, but one of the reasons we have the stage that shrinks the room is we were like, this is way the F out here. No one's going to make it here. So we better figure out how we can do a show that sells 900 tickets and 1,400 tickets. And in the meantime, people blew by Williamsburg, out to Ridgewood, out to Bushwick. Uber happened, and suddenly we found ourselves, by the time we opened 2 years ago, kind of in the thick of it all over again.
What kind of discussions do you have in your partnership with AEG about where you want to expand, or like how much is that a factor in just preparing to go into a market, deciding where a void is? Like, how would you characterize your working relationship with AEG?
I would say it is a great relationship, and they partnered with us in the Northeast because they believed in what we were doing and that we are experts at what we do, and they're taking our guidance, and they've been fantastic partners, and we make decisions together, but we've been, for example, focused on finding a larger room in Boston, and we were just able to announce a new 3,500 capacity venue that we're building with our partners at AEG, and that's going to be amazing. And so we led the charge, and they worked with us.
Did they approach you, or did you go to them? And actually, the other thing is, did you feel you needed that partnership to sustain and expand?
I mean, they approached us. They were interested. I think we filled some gaps for them regionally. I think they liked the Bowery aesthetic and thought it fit in with Golden Voice on the West Coast, and certainly our friends at Madison House who do Forest Hills, and Quint down at Jazz Fest, and Louis Messina and Don Strasberg and Chuck in the Rocky Mountains. So it felt good, and it felt like a good fit. I think my two partners, John and my wife Chantal, who's out there, I think they were a little further ahead in terms of let's do a deal. And it clearly was time. It clearly, I think we had accomplished what we could do under our own backs, and to have a bigger partner come in who could fold. Brooklyn Steel opened and it was on time but way over budget. And if they weren't there as our partner / funding partner, the new venue in Boston would never have happened. The Franklin Music Hall in Philadelphia would never have happened. We would have been paralyzed for 2 or 3 or 4 years kind of digging out from what we had done in Brooklyn Steel. So for us, it was exciting, like all of a sudden, all those projects in the pipeline, and you hope 1 or 2 happen, because if 3 happen, you're buried. All of a sudden, you're like, no, we can do 3 projects.
We can do this.
Yeah.
We can do it. And Boston's been a big step there, and Electric Factory, now Franklin Music Hall in Philadelphia was another big step, and we were glad to do that with them.
What was the point when you felt that you needed to expand out of the New York metropolitan area? Because what you had done was actually you had built, from the Mercury when you were booking there, and then the Bowery Ballroom when that opened, and of course Terminal 5 and all of these other rooms. You had built that you had built the ladder to the point that you could have the Decemberists and the White Stripes in the smaller rooms, and then you could have the White Stripes at the Garden, which I think was the first show you did there. And then I saw the Decemberists at Summer Stage. And so you had actually built the ladder in the New York area. Why did you feel you needed more ladders?
Well, a few quick things. Our first shows.
I'm asking because I come from that older culture where you thought of the local promoter was the guy. It was Electric Factory in Philadelphia. It was Bill Graham in San Francisco, Cellar Door, Barry Fay in Denver. Yeah. And to me, that was the original. And I worked at the Tower Theater, so as an usher. So I always thought of the local politics, concert promotion as a very local experience.
In that time when we expanded to Boston, I think there were a lot of agencies, and acts that were emerging that people weren't paying attention to, and so that is one of the reasons kind of New York launched. So we actually had a lot of agents, younger agents that their act, Decemberists or someone like that, who was just suddenly coming out of the 500 cap, and we're like, hey, we can do with that, and they were like, there's no competition in Boston. It's a great market. It's all done law. You get in there, it'll be the greatest thing. And we heard that from a bunch of people. Yeah. And finally, someone did an introduction. He had been at Webster Hall and to the Royale. Dave Ralph. And we opened, and immediately all the agents who said, we're going to support you, headed for the doors because they were scared shitless of Don Law. So, Josh Body, who runs the office, who Dalton Sims, who I saw Dalton before, introduced us to, he slugged it out, quite frankly. And we then opened the Sinclair, went down, and wins Venue of the Year every year in Boston and Great Scott. So we've now got that ladder in Boston, 250, 525, 1200, and then we've just been feeding stuff to House of Blues. So again, that's where the 3500 fits in. But I think when people talk about consolidation in the music business with AEG and Live Nation, going back to what you said, 20 or 30 years ago, there weren't 9 promoters in a market. There weren't 5 promoters in Philadelphia. There weren't 4 it was the Belkins. There's 1 or 2 or 3. So it's changed. I'm not pretending it hasn't changed, but it's always been that way.
Yeah. Well, actually, I want to ask something, and this is not specifically related to Bowery Presents, but, as in your partnership with AEG, I find it very interesting that both Live Nation and AEG declined to get involved in Woodstock 50. And that, in a sense, has probably sunk the festival. It's not official, but there's no indication that this thing can really be saved. were there any discussions that you were aware of? And I'm not asking so much for, super inside baseball, but it's an interesting thought that, an event like that could actually be dismissed as not workable in a marketplace where AEG, for example, co-promotes Jazz Fest in New Orleans, and they did 495,000 people over 2 weekends, so capacity was not the issue. Is there anything you can spill on that?
No, we were not involved in any discussions about Woodstock.
I'm not sure how, it's the old, when the plane took off, I don't know if there had been discussions with AEG or Live Nation. Certainly, I'd say about a month ago, no one reached out directly to Bowery, but we were aware that there were opportunities if someone wanted to kind of jump in and try to save it. And we had zero interest in the middle of April trying to salvage an event in August. So I have no idea how that plays out other than being a big mess.
What does that conundrum tell you about the wisdom of putting on festivals and really in a sense, what the marketplace can bear? Because all the numbers that got thrown around with that thing, $495 tickets, and that's before you park. 65,000 versus 100,000, and as a company that works on a different scale, still it makes you wonder where's the top of the ladder? Like what makes sense and what should you stick with that
Well, we've stuck away from festivals, and we know and like concerts and venues, and we're not afraid to go outdoors, but I think speaking for myself, but we've agreed along the way that a festival should be special, the venue should be special, and special for whatever that venue should be.
And manageable, too.
And manageable, and safe, and we've just never found the right combination to pursue. If I lived in Southern California and I could do concerts in Indio on a polo field, I'd love it. The weather's perfect.
We were seemingly an obvious company to do festivals, and I think for us, we talked about it, and we have said it over and over again, like in the 90s when there were a couple cool radio shows, the K-Rock and all that, and then all of a sudden you woke up one day and realized that the K-Rock show in New York had been the exact lineup in Philly, in Hartford, Boston. There was no unique point of view. As Jomo said, where's a unique site? Reynolds Island is fine. It's fine. But it's not incredible. It's not wonderful. So we were like...
It wasn't unique. It was almost like a Dick Clark review. The same 15 acts are touring the same 10
And that's
cities.
what it is. So I think there's clearly, diminishing returns in the festival business. And the festival business was always a big bet, right? If you hit it and you won it, then you're in great shape. And if you didn't, you lost a lot of money. And that's what it feels like Woodstock is.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel thought out.
Well, you've both had very interesting roads to Bowery Presents and the state of things now. I want to start with you, Jim. You were actually booking Radio City when you started working with Ron Delsener Slater in 1998, and then you ultimately became president of Live Nation before joining John and Michael at Bowery Presents. In your case, and correct me if I'm wrong, it almost seems like you went from being national, even international, to local, because that was the focus of Bowery at the time. It was almost, in a sense, you were almost downsizing.
It felt that way, I think, to a lot of people who wondered why I made the move. Just to clarify, I was head of Live Nation New York, not head of the whole thing. But yeah, even before...
But that's a big Live Nation chapter.
Right. Before Radio City, I'd been at Wolf Trap, which is the only national park for the performing arts, and how I started. So I'd been part of a big not-for-profit. I'd gone to Radio City, which was RGI, Rockefeller Group, a big privately held company, to Ronnie and Mitch, which was just when SFX the first time rolled through. So for me, talking to Jomo and Michael, I was interested in doing something with them, but doing something with them and Live Nation, doing a joint venture or something. When they presented the opportunity, I don't know how to... I was curious. It definitely felt like a complete shift, but I'd always been part of something big, so it was kind of, hey, can I be part of something small and grow it and see where it goes? I think a lot of my friends in the business and at Live Nation thought it was a bizarre move, but at the end of the day, I felt like the New York Yankees, and I'm a Mets fan. I hate the Yankees. I felt like Live Nation New York, if I had a great year, everyone would say, yeah, you should have had a great year. And if we missed something somewhere, you just woke up January 1st like, So it was a chance to just start fresh and start new. And it has been such an incredible wild ride. And I'm so happy I made the move. And again, second time Chantal, my wife, supported me, and it's been amazing.
When you and Michael initially had the discussions with Live Nation, what were you that interested in partnering up?
No.
Not
What was the reluctance? Because people usually like to buy up instead of...
Yeah, Live Nation had, at the time, kind of had stink on its shoes. It wasn't looked at as a positive company. I think the patrons thought they were doing all sorts of diabolical things as kind of related to being Clear Channel. The industry was kind of like, So I think the idea for, not to speak on your behalf, but for Jomo and Michael was like, we've got a great thing. We want to see where it goes. And quite frankly, putting our boat next to yours right now is going to not be good for us.
Because in a sense, you were already building separate relationships with artists who were not really, somebody like Jack White. At that point, he would have been very suspicious of a larger corporation. He had, Third Man was already his company.
Absolutely. We were getting to start with bands at the Mercury Lounge and build that relationship. And back then, I would jokingly say that we were building bands for Irving Plaza. We would grow an artist to Bowery Ballroom and then hope that they would do 2 or 3 nights, or as the White Stripes did with us, it was 4. But then they went on, and what I learned was they were moving on to Jim. And we had become friends when I moved to New York to work for Mammoth Records. And one of the things that I learned early in the music business, which was kind of sad, was that there weren't actually a ton of people that loved music as much as I thought I did and that everyone else would. And,
Actually, stand up and show him your jacket.
Fare thee well gift. Thank you, Shappy.
He's not
Gersh.
fronting. This is the real deal.
I wear it a lot. And Jim loved music and was out at shows and also booking the big shows, the big ones. To me, the graduating class, the masters, et cetera. And to me, I felt as though we were on the right path with Bowery. We were growing with the artists, and we figured out a relationship at Webster Hall, and that was the next step. And it just seemed like the perfect marriage to have us come together, and we could grow artists to the size that Jim's experienced, call that the town halls and then the beacons. And before you know it, we were doing our first garden shows, which were Barry Manilow, 3 nights.
Well, I missed that night, sorry.
That slipped by a few people, but that was actually our first experience at the garden. And then,
How did that go, since I wasn't there?
It went well. They didn't sell out.
Barry Manilow didn't sell out?
No.
Wow.
Should I have not gone there?
It's fine.
Go there, come on.
No.
That same year we did, so it was Barry, and then we did a couple of John Mayer show, and then 3 nights of Dispatch, White Stripes,
Muse,
and then we did Arcade Fire and LCD Sound System at Randall's Island for 23,000 people. The same month we opened Music Hall, and the same month we opened Terminal 5, and we didn't have a pot to piss in, and we were hanging by a thread.
What kind of negotiations would you have with somebody like Jack about playing Madison Square Garden? Because that's a huge jump for him. Like, how do you present something like that in a way that is true to his aesthetic and yet also deals with the undeniable demand for a band like that to play a room like that?
I think that was one of the things coming from a larger concert promoter was, the voodoo or the science of trying to figure out when it was time for a band to move up. And I think what Jomo had done was booked him at the Merc, booked him at Bowery, booked him at Webster Hall. And so there were any number of bands that we already knew before a show went on sale that they were ready to make the leap. By the time we had sold out the Bowery Ballroom, we had 2 Webster Halls on hold and ready to go. So from our point of view, it wasn't much of a risk booking White Stripes. I think the lineup was first of 3 was Porter Wagner, and then the
Yes.
second was
I remember that. That was pretty
Grinder
cool.
Man. Grinder Man. So it was a completely hip show. We never
Yeah.
had a doubt it would sell. We priced it right. I think, again, all those. I mean, to this day, our shows at arenas are top tickets $50, top tickets $60. There's no money to be made. It's all risk, but it's just we want to grow with the artists and keep bringing them along and keep them turned on. Like, okay, this is the next step in your career.
What were your experiences when you started? You went from Mammoth to booking the Mercury. What were your initial experiences in booking the Mercury? Because the club had opened in 94.
Oh, no.
So this is the 25th year.
Yes.
So, like,
Bowery, 98.
what would have been your experiences that gave you sort of the grounding and the confidence to know that, this is an aesthetic that we can then build beyond this very small 4-walled space? Because that's the Bowery Ballroom is what came next.
Well, when I joined and started booking the Mercury in 2001, the Bowery Ballroom existed, was open.
It was open.
So to me, that the template was kind of there and had been formulated, and it worked. And Michael, who had built the rooms, built amazing artist-focused rooms. And artist-focused, artists felt grand. I mean, the Bowery Ballroom stage and looking out, I mean, I think the artists felt like big rock stars in New York, and I think the fans felt like they were in a special place, and they are. And, but I think it was more spending time with the artists at Mercury and then growing at Bowery, and then literally it felt like waving goodbye or giving them a bus ticket up to Irving Plaza. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong with Irving Plaza, but it felt like we could continue, that we could do it. We could be an alternative to Clear Channel or SFX Live Nation and maybe do it better, do it as well, but bring something new and fresh.
Are there, I think of somebody like Bill Graham, who was not the easiest man to get along with. I got yelled at by him pretty intently, although it was more because of the guy I worked for at the time. It wasn't me personally. But he was also somebody who was very focused on, they always talk about the fan experience. He basically invented that, to the point that when people left the Fillmore Auditorium in 1966 and 67, there was a barrel of apples for people to take on the way home. And I think the other thing people forget is that the Fillmore, the Avalon, Carousel, the Electric Factory in Philadelphia, Fillmore East, none of them had liquor. It was soda, and it was the show. And in a sense, that method of presentation just is not an economic, it's not viable. And yet you want to try and keep something of that in the experiences. Are there lessons in the old school that you have considered taking to heart as you try to develop the aesthetic at Bowery? Bowery Presents?
I mean, we debate things endlessly that are important to us, and we're not sure if they're important to anyone else. Like our concessionaire, when we moved over, we had always been self-operated, the bars, and then when we did the deal with AEG, we took on a third-party concessionaire, and they were hell-bent to sell 24-ounce beers. And we were just like, it's such a bad look. I feel like I'm at a hockey game, and like people are going to be falling down drunk. And so eventually it was, would we look at...
It's like going to Hooters or something.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So, we debated endlessly, and finally they're like, 20 ounces, can we try it out? Can we just try it out? So we tried it out, and 80% of the people bought 20-ounce beers the first night. But I think until the last couple of weeks, Rough Trade and Music Hall, we still said no. We said, fine, Brooklyn Steel, Terminal 5. So who cares about all that? The point is, we're debating those things. Certainly when we just reopened Webster Hall, every night we're there's a punch list of 5 or 10 or 20, 30, 40 things that we want to do. But when I go to Music Hall, like, I'm jotting stuff down and sending a note to the GM or sending a note to our buyers saying, hey, is this right? How come we weren't there? The posters were dated. We got to be looking forward. It's little things like that. So I'd say very important to us.
What do you look for physically in a property for expansion? Obviously, I think of the Bowery Ballroom. It was, from what I understand, it was originally a carpet store. It might have actually been a Chinese movie theater at one point,
right.
way back in the day.
I actually think it was a vaudeville house that was built just at the Depression crashed. It may have never opened as a vaudeville house.
Yeah, because that balcony it really gives it that old 1920s New York touch when you walk in there.
For us, I think our greatest achievements, Union Transfer in Philadelphia, that was a spaghetti warehouse. The Sinclair in Boston, that was an atrium of an office in Harvard Square. Brooklyn Steel was a steel fabrication plant. Saturn down in Birmingham was just like a garage, basically. So we're most proud of those where we go in and see a raw space and kind of picture, okay, how can this work?
And what do you look for? Do you look at a space and go, we can do this with it? Or do you look at a space and say, this is giving something to us?
Definitely depends, but I think that we're usually in search of something or there's some direction, but I think that an open space with great sight lines needs to be the beginning and potential for the appropriate capacity.
Coming from New York, where backstage is everywhere, with the exception of Brooklyn Bowl, which is fantastic, by the way. The quarters are so tight, they're just horrible. So when we go to an outer market and suddenly see how an artist can be treated and have some space and a separate catering area and a place where the band can be in different rooms if they need to be, we're looking at that. We're looking at backstage amenities. What's the load-in like? You can have the perfect venue and then have the world's worst load-in the way Webster Hall used to be without an elevator and up those steep stairs. So all that factors in, and quite frankly, the rent, is if the rent's too much, it's not going to make our $16 and $18 tickets viable. We fought hard to keep the ticket prices low, and maybe we helped
the service fees low
and all that stuff. So we've kind of artificially suppressed the market where the Music Hall of Williamsburg in 2007, the average ticket price was $16, and I think 11 or 12 years later, we're at $19. So everything else has gotten crazy expensive, and so.
But
they talk about a booming economy, but people are strapped, and it really gets harder to make decisions about what you want to go see because life's not getting any easier out there.
I feel like we were one of the first I don't know if it was in the industry, but certainly in New York, where we kept our service fees low, and when we sent offers in, we put that at the top of our offers of what our service fees were. And half the time, we might get a call from an agent who says, well, I need to know the service fees, and say, no problem, it's right on the top of your offer. Oh, I didn't see him, goodbye. But we were waving the flag and wanted to tell the agents and managers that we're working with to share that with their artists and fans, and we believe it matters. I think that, I don't know, I hope that someone who's going to one concert might go to two or three. And
in '08, when the economy went boom, and people would ask us, are you guys okay? And we're like, nothing changed for our fans. They're baristas, they're living, in a 2-bedroom with 5 people, they're struggling to pay their college loan, but they didn't lose the nest egg. They didn't lose the weekend home. They didn't lose the $1 million bonus. So they kept coming through the years, and we've tried to stay with that. And again, as our bands grow and get older and the fans get older, the ticket prices go up accordingly. But it goes back to before. We don't think there should be a barrier to entry when it's a sense of discovery for a band.
Are there aspects of your costs at any of the venues, or let's use New York, Brooklyn Steel, Music Hall, Webster in particular, where you're looking at the issue of tariffs right now, where any of those costs of things being imported may be affecting cost relationships in the business?
not for us, definitely not.
No. Maybe we should be. We'll make a call afterwards, but no.
Yeah, definitely not, thankfully.
Well, good. You have a recession-proof business. Congratulations.
Some days it
At least
feels
a tariff-proof business. Anyway.
tariff-proof, exactly.
One of the things that I did want to ask is the issue of security at venues, because that is something that has changed dramatically in easily the last 10 years, probably more in the last 3 or 4. And I notice that, yes, I am often on a press list, so I don't always have the ticket cost issue. But like everybody else, I have to go through security. I have to get patted down. I have to take everything out of my pockets. And each venue, it seems like it has to be different at every venue because every venue is physically different. Just as an example, I went to see Trey Anastasio at United Palace. Beautiful theater. Because of the physical setup of that lobby, all of the security was out on the street, around the corner, under tents, including the metal detectors. And the lines went all the way around the block to like the 181st subway stop in the rain. So how do you address these issues of security, particularly in buildings that were not built with that in mind, like Webster Hall or Music Hall of Williamsburg? You know, how do you consider that, because it is now an absolutely unavoidable fact of life and a fact of the experience itself?
I mean, I would say with the United Palace, they're not doing, or they haven't been doing concerts regularly enough to where they could get into a routine and process everybody through the line in a quick manner. But I don't know, to me, it harkens back to going from smoking to non-smoking. There were moments when the laws changed, when I remember standing physically at the top of the stairs at Bowery Ballroom telling people they couldn't leave, or they could leave, but there's no re-entry and you can't come back in. And this intense, you have to let us out to smoke. And I'm like, no, I don't.
I'm addicted.
Yeah, and help. And eventually that's segued into having to create smoking sections. And it's not as though the government reached out and sent us money and said, here, let me help you create a smoking section. We just had to do it. And I feel as though in 2019, we have metal detectors. And I think that we need them as deterrents. We need them for fan comfort in general, to feel comfortable that they're in a safe place. And we just need to make it work. And with the reopening of Webster Hall, it was just a part of the conversation. We're going to have bathrooms, we're going to have metal detectors, we're going to have new doors, we're going to have new sound. You know, it's a given.
Since I haven't been to Webster yet because I was out of town when you opened, where is the security? Because when I used to go to Webster, it was, again, done on the sidewalk because there was no space once you went up the stairs into that lobby, and then you're literally in the venue.
It's on the street. It's right on the sidewalk. Metal detectors that are on the street. So, and hopefully, you know, our goal is there certainly to speed up the getting in process. So when you show up, there's not a 35 or 40-minute wait to get in. But as Jomo said, for us, when it started to become apparent we should have metal detectors, it goes back to what you said about concert being such a personal experience. And we were like, this just feels so bad, and it's an escape, and it's a terrible way to kind of. And meanwhile, people embrace it. People, I think, are relieved that we're doing it. Gives them maybe going in all of a sudden like, oh wait, someone has been paying attention, and hopefully they're paying attention to other things on the inside of the venue as well related to security. So we made the change, and people.
They like it, and we talked about it endlessly, and we found places inside the venue that were neat and clean, and then one of us would remind us that actually keeping them outside or very visible was much more the point. We're like, okay, and it's been a positive learning curve.
Have you had to train or school the security in the manner of it? The reason I ask is because I think that, you know, when you go through this experience, and you're going to a concert, you're going to be released from daily aggravation. You want to see your favorite act. You want to discover something new. And the first thing you do, it's like checking into a flight at Newark. And you're and there's a mental reset. And I know that I've had personal experiences, and this is just me going through security like a private citizen, where I actually felt, and it wasn't at your properties, but where I actually felt like I was being treated like a criminal. I was deemed guilty until proven innocent. And there was one particular instance, and it was at the Garden. And this would have been, I think it was right after the Bataclan tragedy. So suddenly, metal detectors, everything's increased, everything's crazy, and it was Fish New Year's Eve week. And I don't know what the Garden did in terms of the actual staffing, but a friend of mine who's actually here, we went to the gig and we got there a little early, going to see Fish. We go through, take the stuff out of your pockets, whatever, and the security guard took my wallet, opened my wallet, and started looking in the credit card slots. And I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, well, we're checking for drugs." And I went, my first initial, I was about to say, "Do you realize who you fucking booked here tonight? It's Fish. That's the whole point of the gig." I kept a civil tongue, but my friend, his Tylenol was confiscated, and it took me the better part of the first set to calm down, because I felt like this is not, you know your customer. That's really the whole point of any business. And I felt that, yes, this was it was the beginning of things. They're actually much better at the Garden. I've had good experiences there. The Beacon is better. Everyone seems to be getting into the rhythm of it. But there is this mentality where the first thing you do before you even get in the door is you're being checked to see if it's okay for you to come through the door. And I don't know if there's really a way to address that as promoters or even as fans.
You know, it's tough. We use third-party concessionaires at most of our venues. So, third-party
Security.
Thank you, Jomo.
Yep.
So for us, you know, we love seeing the same people at the front door every night who are used to it, who know the drill, who know not to go through the wall. And unfortunately, someone could be there on their first night, or it's a 3-night run and they're there the first 2 nights and not the third. So it's not perfect, but again, it's something we stress with our security company. At the former Electric Factory, now Franklin Music Hall, our GM, Tony, she came over from Union Transfer, thought that the security was so heavy-handed towards the
Fans.
Yeah, and so insisted that they undergo training and extra sensitivity and all that kind of thing. So it's something we're aware of. It's an ongoing thing. I wish it were perfect. It's not. You know.
But it's also
in our venues, we have a little more control, and we're having weekly calls, and we're telling the GMs who may not be aware to discuss with the security of what the show is, and if we're having the Disco Biscuits, that this is what a Disco Biscuit fan may be. This is what a Nickel Creek fan is like. It's going to be people who are upset that there aren't chairs, maybe, or you know, I think preparing the staff.
Or there's going to be
the
bands
team.
where they wish the chairs were gone and they're going to throw them. So
Exactly.
When we booked Webster Hall, you know, years ago, that was one of the big raps with our fans, was that the security there was club security. So again, not to harp on the December. So a December's fan would come up with their backpack and talking about, you know, Yates and Keats, and all of a sudden that, you know, this monster who's waiting to throw someone out at 4 a.m. would be patting him down and would be like, that's a whole different thing, come on.
And I think that ultimately they couldn't believe that a mellow crowd could exist and come into Webster Hall, and eventually we found some common ground, but we're much happier to be in control now of the venue.
how hard was it to break up the partnership with Michael?
It was hard. It feels pretty weird to have a company called The Bowery Presents and not book the Bowery Ballroom and be a part of it, but I also feel as though Michael and I started something great. Jim joined early on, and the rocket ship started to take off, and for Michael's own reasons, we parted ways, and I feel good about it, but it was hard, for sure.
Was there a particular issue or point, or just like a point of divergence in which obviously you had shared goals, which built something very special and actually very sturdy on a very local. You could have just been a great local promoter without all of the Philly and the Boston and everything else. You actually had that industry and that reputation. And it's interesting that you sort of got to that point, and that's sort of when the strain came.
I think if I'm remembering correctly, there had been tension. Again, that's going back to when we had rapid growth, and the hackneyed expression, we were out over our skis, but we were out over our skis. So the tension that was going on to grow the business, to maintain the business, frankly, to make payroll, was extraordinary. And so I think that rapid growth probably put extra pressure on that. Without that extra pressure, maybe it'd be the three of us sitting up here. But when there was a particular thing that I was just like, this isn't working, I'm the last guy in, let's figure out how to unwind this. And Michael waited a day or so and actually wrote a very thoughtful email. He said, look, you and John, I think you two are better suited to working together. Why don't we figure out a way for me to exit and you guys to continue to work together. It was super hard, as Jomo said. It's, thinking back to those early meetings we had and, just talking and figuring stuff out and what we were able to accomplish in a short time, it can get pretty wistful and sentimental. And at the same time, it ran its course. It's like, it's a divorce. It's not like I go, I wonder if, no, it's done, it's finished. I wish him luck. Maybe he wishes us luck, I don't know. But we had a good run and it's behind us.
Do you sometimes not worry, but stay aware of the fact that with the expansion going into Philly, Boston, the South, everything else, that you can lose the local connection, the local, I don't know, there's just sort of a vibe to what you do that, with all due respect to Boston and Philly, seems very New York. And that you don't want to lose that and at the same time be able to spread that vibe where it's needed, in the void, as it were.
I feel strongly that having our local partners has been essential, and in Philly, everyone is from Philly, and they know Philly, and we might bring our New York ideas, but we get the Philly version, and we do it Philly's way. And
what would be different from the New York way from Philly's way?
It could be the
beer
type of beer we're selling. Philly, and again, let's back up. Philly and Boston don't want to hear about anything from New York City, so we were acutely aware of that.
Boston in particular.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So, we've let, in Boston's case, it grow organically. It has its own personality. It's run by but beer is a good example in both places, actually. Like, it's local beer. They're adamant about it. Fine, no problem. Setting the price for beer, setting the service charge, free box, little things like that, and maybe bigger things. But when they say, no, this is how we do it up here, it's like, oh, okay, we'll defer.
Can you actually see where particular artists or bands have a strong connection to that city? I think of when I was in Philly, I think of people like Billy Joel and Bowie broke out of Philly. They broke out of the Tower Theater. They broke out of the Main Point. Springsteen broke out of Philly in many, many ways. Do you see artists breaking out of particular markets like New York, Boston, Philly, the way they would have when there was FM radio and that kind of support, versus now where everything is streamed, everything is universal, and really anything can be heard anywhere? People may not necessarily be listening, but the availability is there. Are any of those factors and those variables still in play when you're booking?
I feel sadly that a lot less so. I don't know if I say back in the day, I'm not sure which day that would be at this point, but
2001?
Say 2001, I felt like
Yeah, at the Mercury.
to be a band from out of town, I'd want to know what are you doing in your hometown? And are you selling out, whether, 200, 400, 500, 1,000, and then come to New York and sell 200? To me, I couldn't understand how you couldn't sell a few hundred tickets in your hometown, and then, to me, that was the beginning. And we definitely still I would love to discover new bands in new cities all the time, but it feels a little less so. In the early 2000s, we joked that everybody was from Brooklyn, wherever we met. When Jim and I traveled a bit to England and we're hearing about the Great Escape Festival, the biggest hype were the Brooklyn bands. We were kind of rolling our eyes, but I don't know, it keeps going.
Yeah, I think the days of bands crushing it regionally and then happening on a national, you keep going there, Jay Giles or Bob Z, that doesn't seem to happen anymore. We still feel, again, because of New York and because of who lives here and the size of New York, but I think last fall at Brooklyn Steel, we did 4 nights of Nicholas Jar, 7,200 tickets, sold out weeks in advance. Could have done a 5th show. I think we did 1,000 tickets in Philly and 900 in Boston. So there's still, it flips the other way where New York is so far ahead of the rest of the country. And those are 2 hip cities that are 90 miles away and 150 miles away. So New York still is breaking things and where everyone wants to be.
The other thing, the sort of flip of that is recently you did 3 sold-out nights with Foles at Brooklyn Steel. And I went to the last one, and it was just a killing gig.
Yeah, amazing.
So good live.
With 3 nights there, you were at the larger capacity of the room, so it was what, 1,800 a night times 3. Where do you go with them next? What is the next room that you put them in?
I think that's specifically for the Foles a big question. When we started talking about those gigs, I think Foles had played T5 4 or 5 times, and the agent was like, we can't go back there again. And Hammerstein feels like a lateral move, and I don't think we could get avails at Radio City. So we actually ended up booking 2 nights of Foles. The first one sold fast, so fast we said, let's roll back to it. So boom, 5,400 tickets. I would assume it's a Radio City or Central Park Summer Stage. They're easily good for 5,000. Could be one of those things. I know there's a part 2 of the record coming this fall. If it hits, we had the conversation with Muse, or Forest Hills, but with Muse, we said to Marsha, the agent, back in 2007, look, if you do Radio City or you do Summer Stage, you're going to do 1+1. You're going to blow out the first one. Let's not mess around. Let's do the Garden. And she was like, let's go talk to Cliff and Peter, which is exactly what we didn't want to do, if you know Cliff and Peter. But we went and talked to them and sold them on it, and Muse sold out the Garden. Yeah.
So the ladder is there.
Yeah.
But it has the change in the business and that loss of that sort of regional sort of starting point. Has that changed the nature of how you sort of populate the ladder?
The ladder is way sped up. It's happening much faster than when I joined up in 2006. It felt like, we still talk about the National, but I think the National, last time we counted, had done well over 50 shows for Barry Presents. And at show number 49 is when they finally played Barclays. So, that used to take forever to happen.
And I miss it.
Yeah. Vampire Weekend, the XX, on one album cycle would do 9, 10, 11, 12 shows in New York. That doesn't seem to happen anymore. It seems kind of like play here, the jump, on to the next one, next album.
Well, what do you want to see, or how do you feel you can address repopulating the bottom of the ladder? What are you looking at? Are there acts now that you're looking at and saying, this is something that if we jump in now, we can actually build this in a very organic and sped up way, but naturally?
We've invested in the Sinclair Music Hall, Rough Trade, Boot and Saddle in Philadelphia. The amount of money and energy we've invested in rooms kind of under 750. I don't think anyone's ever done it anywhere. We're still doing that. We're still looking for opportunities. I don't know. I think Brooklyn Steel will do about 200 shows in Webster Hall. In its first full year, we'll do about 225 shows. So you're talking about 425 shows in the 14 to 1,800 capacity. That's a lot of shows. That doesn't show a lack of new bands on the way up. And I think as everything, people talk about fragmenting and there's not the big moments anymore, that probably speaks better to the club business at a kind of under 1,500 or maybe under 2,000, that there's all these little niches that have passionate fans. And we used to say, maybe you never grow beyond town hall. We're happy to be with you to town hall. You know, we were.
You play at town hall. You've been on the stage Bob Dylan was at, so you should go
Exactly.
home happy.
Absolutely.
Totally. You look at someone like John Prine, who we've done dozens of shows with, and God bless us having this incredible late career moment, but we'd book town hall shows, and that seemed like that's what John Prine was.
appropriate.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it was Carnegie Hall, it was King's, it was Radio City, and it's like, yeah, that's a great story.
Do you think in some ways the business that you're in now functions in an A&R capacity that has replaced record companies? Because record companies, for the most part, do not have traditional A&R departments anymore because they're not signing artists in a long-term developmental mindset.
I think that there's an aspect of us being an A&R source, but I think the internet would be the other big source.
But can you trust the internet? I don't.
That's a big question. But back to growing the artist, well, just one thing that I was thinking about is, and
the reason I
Please.
responded to the internet that way is that, you know, page views are not loyalty. They are not commitment.
I mean, I've told this story enough, but Leor Cohen asked us one time when we were talking to him about 10 years ago, what's the secret sauce? And I said, it's John Moore. It's all those bands he booked that no one was paying attention to Spoon and TV on the radio and the December. And forget about being an incubator or an A&R department now. John was a A&R department 15, 20 years ago. And he was curating, another overused word, he was curating the Bowery Ballroom. To the point where agents and managers would be livid that their band wasn't cool enough or wasn't the right look. And you know, to this day, we talk about our rooms like, it's not a public library. Like, you can't just come in and say, I'm taking that date. Like, well, actually, no, we'll decide what you're going to do and not do. And maybe we're a little more cooperative than young Mr. Moore was 15
concert
years
promotion
ago.
is not a democracy.
It is not a democracy.
but we're definitely a lot more cooperative these days. But
You sort of alluded to this a minute ago. The company is called Bowery Presents. How weird is it not to have a room on the Lower East Side?
I mean, it's a little weird, but to be honest, I feel like we created the name, we earned it, I love it, and the Lower East Side's different now. I'm okay.
Our office was on Ludlow Street, so for years it would be, what's your routing tonight? It was up to the Merck, up to Webster Hall, and down to Bowery Ballroom. And as Jomo said, like, I remember those early years on Ludlow, like, there was nobody there. There was nobody there. And then I remember walking to work one day, and there were hordes of people coming from the east side to the 2nd Avenue subway. And I was like, who? And it was just, it had gentrified and moved in that decision. So I think Bowery grew and grew up, and it was fine for us to leave the Lower East Side. And it's a little strange to not be involved in the Bowery or the Merck. It is. It's weird. I think there'll be other opportunities in Manhattan that we're excited about. And
You just took the Bowery uptown, across the river, down to Philly, up to Boston, down south.
Brooklyn, baby.
It's like you're ZZ Top. You're bad. You're nationwide. I know we're getting. I can't see. Actually, I'm at the 0 mark here. I do have one last question. You guys put on shows for a living, but I know you also do this for your life. What are you going to see next, and for fun, not business?
Well, the next on my calendar for fun is a family show with my son and his friends. We're going to see Juice WRLD and Ski Mask, the Slump God.
I'm going to one-up Jomo. I flew to Richmond, Virginia last night, and I saw Juice WRLD and Ski Mask, the Slump God at some amphitheater we booked down there. So that's you're just going to Hammerstein.
They were just warming up, Jim.
Jim Glancy, John Moore, Bowery Presents. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you.